Hi, my name is Rafi Sharak. I will be moderating this session of the Society for Academic Emergency Medicine's Research Learning Series, or RLS. I am a recent graduate of the Yale Emergency Medicine Residency Program, and I'm currently a fifth year research fellow as part of their integrated research fellowship program, which is called the YES program. I'm delighted to be moderating today's session, which is also called How to Build and Maintain an Academic Emergency Medicine Research Program. We have three different emergency medicine attending physicians who are all experienced readers of research. We'll start with a little bit of introductions and then we'll move to some rapid fire questions. We're just going to go with Dr. Coupe first because he's local.
All right. Thank you for having me. I'm Edouard Coupe. I'm an assistant professor in emergency medicine at Yale School of Medicine, and I'm also core faculty in the Yale program for addiction medicine. And I guess my background is I did a T32 at the Center for Emergency Care and Policy Research at the University of Pennsylvania, and then came to Yale, joined faculty at Yale on the K-12 drug use HIV and addiction research as a drug use HIV and addiction research fellow. That's a mouthful, but looking forward to talking more about that.
Okay, just kind of going along counterclockwise from my room. Dr. Love.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us this afternoon. I'm Jennifer Love. I'm an assistant professor of emergency medicine at the Icahn School of Medicine at Mount Sinai in New York City. I'm doing research in a little bit of a circuitous route. So I actually did a clinical fellowship first. After graduating from residency, I did 2 years of medical toxicology fellowship at Oregon Health and Science University. And then I moved back to the East Coast, New York City, where I did the T32 program in emergency care research with Dr. Lynn Richardson at Mount Sinai, and I stayed on as faculty, and I'm currently in the process of applying for a K-23 now along that pathway. So happy to be here and excited to talk to everybody.
Wonderful. I'm guessing just going through my screen, and please let me know if I pronounce this wrong, Dr. Dektiar.
And this is why I thought it would be a good idea for us to introduce ourselves. Nobody should have to deal with my last name. My name is Sasha Dektar. I am one of the current T32 research fellows at the Icahn School of Medicine at Mount Sinai in New York City. I am currently working on asymptomatic hypertension and avoidable referrals to the emergency department with a focus of sort of looking at large data sets and bridging them to implementation and affecting change in organizational structures.
Awesome. And finally, we have Dr. Khatri. Did I say that right?
Yeah, exactly right. Thank you. I'm Utsa Khatri. I'm an assistant professor of emergency medicine at Mount Sinai as well, also affiliated with the Institute for Health Equity Research at Mount Sinai. I did a fellowship after residency, the National Clinician Scholars Program. I did it at the University of Pennsylvania, so that was a 2-year fellowship. And then I joined Mount Sinai as research faculty, and I'm currently on a K-23 through NIDA. It's a grant that focuses on improving access to opioid use disorder treatment after release from jail. Happy to be here.
Wonderful. We're happy to have you. Just to start things off, if folks don't mind just going around and kind of explaining some of the fellowship options that you guys had after residency and sort of explaining the different ones that you guys saw available to you and also why you picked which ones you picked. If you don't mind also explaining just for the folks in the room who are new to the NIH alphabet word soup of all the letters and numbers of sort of what each of these things mean. We're talking about K grants and T grants. Feel free to jump in.
Sure.
Whoever wants to first.
Sure. I guess I will start things off. It's really interesting now. I already feel like I'm one of those people who says, like, back in my day. But I feel like when I did residency, I trained at Jacobi Montefiore, Albert Einstein, emergency medicine residency. And I finished in 2016. And I think around that time, I think the pathway in terms of research, I don't think it was as well developed as it really is now. I think in my stage, I knew I wanted to, I enjoyed working clinically, specifically in underserved areas. I knew that I often felt frustrated, like just putting a bandage on my patients and sending them out the door, only for them to return and deal with some of the same issues over and over again. And so I really wanted to go further upstream and look at the environment from which our patients come from, and what other things can we address to kind of address this cycle of them coming into the emergency department repeatedly, and not addressing some of the really social determinants of health that many of our patients face. And so I did a lot of work in programmatic development and injury prevention. And so I hadn't had much research training. And I think when I started off, my exposure was like in bench research. And so then I kind of thought like, oh, I would never do research because a lot of it was just pipetting. And when, it was, I did it for a summer, and, was fine with it, but I was like, I could never do a career in research. And so I knew I didn't want to work clinically. And so I think the pathways now that exist are way more developed than they were back then. And this is now, I guess, close to around 8 years ago. And so I really started Googling actually fellowships. I started actually at SAEM and Googling fellowships that were available specifically under the realm of like public health, because that was my interest then. And so came across a few different fellowships. Some of them were policy based. There was the National Clinician Scholars Program. And then after doing more research, I came across a T32, which was the Center for Emergency Care and Policy Research at Penn. And I remember back then, I had a phone call with my soon-to-be mentor, Dr. Kit Delgado. And I think we talked over the phone in between shifts, and I told him my interests were. And he was like, yeah, you should definitely check this opportunity out. And among the C, like I didn't know at that time whether I wanted to do a policy-focused career, research-focused career. But I think the selling point for me for research was that if I started research and got the skills to do research, I could pivot if I didn't want to do research and do policy. Whereas I felt then that if I did policy, it would be harder to transition to research. And so I did just that. And through a series or cascade of events, did my research training at the T32, which is essentially, Sasha could probably talk more about that, but training grant just out of residency where it's typically designed for. It's much like a fellowship. And so did 2 years of that. And then after that, I was kind of thinking about different opportunities and, where can I go to like continue my career and interest in research. And so came across a K-12, which is essentially like, it protects your time to continue doing research. It is designed for those coming ideally out of fellowship. And it was a 3-year fellowship in addiction, and pursued that at Yale. They have different K-12s or K-12s across the country. And so at that time it made the most sense, and that brought me here. But yeah, happy to answer more questions about my pathway. Yeah, I'll pass it off to someone else.
So as somebody who probably did this search a little bit more recently, so I graduated residency in 2023. I wish I could say that my path there was very different, but honestly, it was just a lot of Googling. I went to a community residency, which I loved, but was about as unacademic as you could get. So I knew that I wanted to get back into academics. I knew I was a nerd, and I knew I needed training. And so I thought that my path there was going to be fellowship. And from there, I just honestly started looking for research fellowships. I knew one of the things I wanted was didactics. Like I wanted to sit down and learn how to do things in structured classes. So anybody who tried to tell me that the fellowship was 1 year, I sort of politely backed away. And anybody who told me that I would have to pay for my own tuition, I again sort of politely backed away. And once we filtered through that and filtered through people who would respond to my emails, I just started those conversations, and based off of conversations, based off of how my topic interests aligned with what the department was doing, just sort of kept having those conversations until I found Mount Sinai and fell a little bit in love. So all I can really add to information about the T32, like you said, it's a grant, so it's funded by the NIH, and it's not a grant that like I applied for and earned. It is a grant that the system has to run the fellowship. So it provides salary support for me so that I work as an attending, but I don't work nearly full-time clinical hours, so that my time is protected to go to class and to do my research.
And just curious, how did you kind of stumble upon the T32 at Sinai? Was it Googling or was there a central resource?
It was a lot of Googling. Honestly, I think it was actually the SAEM fellowship fair. I wandered over to the Mount Sinai table and they sent me to a person who's in the research division, but almost not at all involved in the actual administration of the fellowship. So he was very confused when I reached out to him, but very lovely and connected me to the right people. So just talking to a lot of people and a little bit of serendipity.
Awesome. And for those of you that didn't notice, in the chat, feel free to ask or put any questions. We want to make this as interactive as possible. And we have some folks monitoring the chat too to make sure nothing gets dropped. In fact, I think someone just put in there, is there a registry or list of all the T32 emergency and fellowship programs in the US? That's a good question.
I know that the SAEM fellowship directory is sort of in the process of being updated. In terms of T32 specific programs, the ones that are funded right now are at Mount Sinai, at the University of Pittsburgh. There's one at Chicago. I think that's a recent funded one, or St. Louis. But I think there's only a handful out there that are T32 specific. But there are other programs like the Yale program, which is also, I believe, grant, the funding maybe comes through grant mechanism. And then obviously the NCSP program is incredibly unique. And I want to give Utsa time to talk about that because it is a highly unique fellowship pathway.
Yeah, and I'll just add that the consensus conference for SAM this past spring was focused on building a sustainable and diverse research workforce. And one of the big discussion points was exactly that question I was posed in the chat, is where is there a central resource for fellowship training? And I know that was one of the planned outputs of the conference. I'm sure they're working on that. In terms of my kind of path to the fellowship that I chose, I think similar to probably everyone in this Zoom room and similar to the other panelists, was just increasingly frustrated with kind of the fragile and broken healthcare system that all of our patients, try to navigate the best they can, but unfortunately end up kind of in our hands on the worst day of their lives. And kind of the rapidity of some of the problems we're seeing made me really want to think more upstream. I love patient care. I love the patient-to-patient encounters, but I needed a productive way to kind of channel my frustrations and anger in kind of the inequities I was seeing. And so similar to Eddie, who, by the way, hi, I haven't seen you in a little while, Eddie.
I know.
We overlapped when he was at Penn on
Yes.
his 32
Yeah.
actually, and he was our attending while I was a resident. But I was also, thinking, do I want something policy related? Do I want to work at a health department? Or do I want to focus on research? And I really had no research experience during medical school. I stayed away from research. I was fortunate that I was at a department at Penn during residency that had a lot of researchers and who were really eager to kind of take on mentees and were really generous and gracious with their time, and who all did a type of research that was new to me before I kind of heard about their tracks, and health services research in particular. I also didn't like pipettes or really even clinical trial research. The type of research that really excited me was kind of thinking about access to care, equity in care, delivery of care. And so I ended up applying to the fellowship, because I had so many mentors that I met during residency who had done it or who knew of the program. And I think one of the unique things about the National Clinician Scholars Program is that it truly is multi-specialty, multidisciplinary. So it's a program for MDs as well as PhD nurses who have PhDs, and any specialty is open to it. So in my cohort, we had 2 PhD nurses, we had internal medicine, we had med peds, we had a OBGYN. You know, it's really truly an environment of that spans disciplines and specialties. And what is great about that is that you realize, you know, you can think really big. You don't have to kind of focus so narrow on what you think is like kind of within your lane of emergency medicine research. You're really encouraged to think in terms of how do we fix a broken healthcare system. So there now, when I applied, there were 4 sites. There are now 6 sites with the NCSP. It's similar to kind of the T32 and other fellowships where, because it's a non-clinical fellowship, you spend part of your time as a clinical instructor or a per diem attending, whatever the structure is, but you have a lot of time to think about research projects, take courses. Mine had a master's MSHP degree that was done over 2 years. So methods courses, policy courses, health economics, but also a lot of like small group on kind of career development, like writing op-eds, like how to make your elevator pitch, how to advocate for like a policy change, kind of some of those skills that aren't, doing the data analysis, but are really critical to kind of disseminating your research and other research that is kind of relevant to whatever your mission in your research world is.
And I'll just briefly touch on for anybody who's out there thinking like, they are either in a fellowship currently and are thinking that they want to do research, or they're not sure what type of fellowship they want to do. A research career is a marathon. It's not a sprint. And for me, taking the time to do a clinical research fellowship and really like dive deep on a population of individuals that I wanted to understand really well and understand what the problems were, and really get exposed to the gaps in research. Like in medical toxicology, for years, we haven't really done good research. We've based things off of case reports and case series, and that's how we've built our evidence base. And so really like understanding a group of individuals and knowing what the problems were and what I wanted to fix was really useful 2 years for me. And I kept doing research during that time. And, when I was trying to decide about just taking an academic job versus a second fellowship, which is a big commitment, somebody sort of said to me, it's hard to do research light these days. You really kind of have to jump in with both feet. And if you're going to do it, like commit to it and commit the time and the resources. And the way you do that is with formalized training, because all of your peers that will be looking towards that career path will have a lot of that training through the NCSP program or a T32 or a 2-year research fellowship where they have taken the time to get a master's. And so it was very helpful advice to me, but also it was helpful to have that break and understand like what, I was going to be using that 2 years of research time to like start to focus in on. So if you're somebody who really loves ultrasound or somebody who really loves, pediatric emergency medicine, you can do both. You can carve that career out for yourself, and it's okay to take that time for yourself to develop an area of clinical expertise and then launch research after that, because the timeline for research is so drawn out in terms of your career path. That extra investment will just have a huge return for you.
One thing I want to add to the great comments that were just made is just that coming from somebody who, like me personally, I did not have a lot of exposure to research, thought I would never do it. I know we're kind of biased because the people that are listening in or maybe listening in are likely committed to or interested in research, is that really anybody can do research. Like I think that all it takes is like to have a passion about some issue, whatever it might be, some resilience, because you're going to deal with a lot of rejection and failure along the way. And then after that, like the skills the statistical knowledge, the all of those sorts of skills that it takes to, build, and develop your research career, those can all be taught. And, those all can be taught in, formal research training. So beyond that, you just really have to be passionate about something, and be resilient, because you're going to deal with a ton. I don't know how much to stress that. You're going to deal with a lot of rejection along the way. And so you have to be willing to be, or at least be passionate enough about the issue to really withstand the rejection and kind of keep that as your North Star along the way, to keep plugging away at some of these larger issues that you've committed yourself to solving and understanding more about. So
Perfect. That actually kind of dovetails into the next thing, which is if y'all could speak a little bit more about the training plan that was in each of your research fellowships. I know some of you guys actually did 2 or 3, but specifically if it was self-directed, if it was sort of laid out for you, whether or not it included a master's degree, whether that was a plus or a minus in your guys' case. Yeah, because
I'll
it seems
give
like
a
a
brief
central theme
intro.
is
I can give a
protected
brief
time.
setup to the T32, but I'll definitely let Sasha speak more about it since she's very much in it right now. So the T32 program, it's a 2-year research fellowship for our institution, and it does include and pay for a master's degree in clinical research. That's predominantly, there is a master's in public health at our academic medical school, but the degree that they've sort of carved out is a master's in clinical research. It's a nice, I think, add because it has, carved out time at the end of the year to sort of work on a quote unquote thesis, which is really more like your preliminary work of projects that you might be working on at the same time. It also carves out time for like structured research meetings that we have as a department. It provides very structured mentorship. And so it has a very nice setup. But I know Sasha also had explored like other degrees within the institution. And so she can speak a little bit more about that and what she was thinking there. Because some people I think have gone on to maybe do a PhD or consider a PhD while they're under it.
I do not have the focus or attention span to do a PhD. But I did during medical school do a master's of global health that had a lot of the bare bones of a research degree. So looking at the curriculum for the proposed degree with Mount Sinai, there were a lot of areas of overlap. And luckily, between my mentors, like in the Sinai Research Program and just the people who run the degree at the ICANN School of Medicine, I was able to meet with them early and say, hey, what if we call it a Master's of Clinical Research, but I just take biostatistics classes for the first year? And somehow that worked. So there was a lot of room for negotiation, room for tailoring based off of the skills that I already had and the skills that I wanted to work on. So even if something looks rigid, having a conversation is basically never going to hurt. So you may as well make the ask and see what comes of it. But I echo what Jennifer said. What I really liked about the T32 is I really wanted structure. I really wanted a way back into research and back into academics. And so I wanted a place that was, like, you're going to get a degree. These are going to be your deliverables. Like, this is your research plan. They didn't, like, I get to pick the thing I research, but they're helping me figure out steps and timelines, which is something that I really needed. And so something I really looked for when I was looking at different programs.
Yeah, I started to talk about the coursework that I took, but the degree that actually every NCSP site has a slightly different master's degree that's kind of associated with the program at Penn, where I was the Master of Science in Health Policy Research. And so the course, it was to your question about was it kind of self-directed or was it kind of rigid? I would say that there was a very established kind of course progression. So we had some basic biostatistics that we took in the beginning. like healthcare economics, health policy courses. And then it got, over the 2-year period, we were learning more advanced statistical methods, causal inference courses, longitudinal data analysis. There was also a couple of spaces in the 2-year program for elective courses. So if you really wanted to dive into a methods, or you really wanted to focus on implementation science or something like that, because it was part of the greater University of Pennsylvania course offering, you really had some flexibility. So there was that kind of like, you're a master's student going to courses, doing biostats homework and taking midterms and exams. But then there's also within the NCSP, there's like more self-directed project-based work where you think of an idea, you find mentors either at your program or within the greater NCSP community. You kind of think about a project from start to finish, write the IRB, and all of that is obviously more self-directed. But I think like the common thing with all of these programs, what you need is time. We spend so much time learning clinical emergency medicine, and that took time. So the research stuff is also going to take time. You're not going to, especially if you don't have a background in research, ahead of the fellowship, it's not going to come overnight, and it's really hard to do kind of while you're doing something else full time. So having that dedicated couple of years, and that's often like a thing that when residents are interested in this fellowship or other fellowships, then they reach out to me. The most common thing I hear is, well, I already did like 4-year residency. Like, how much more training do I have to do? Like, how many more years do I have to be a trainee to like have the job I want? And it's just 2, it's only 2 more years in what I hope for everyone will be a very long career. And if it kind of gives you skills and training and perspective to do some work that, really fuels you and, makes you want to keep going, then what's 2 more years, in my opinion?
Yeah, just curious.
Yeah.
Were all of your guys' fellowships 2 years long, or did any of y'all do ones that were shorter or longer?
2 years. And I actually essentially did the same fellowship that Usha did. As a T32 at Penn, I took all the same courses. And I agree. It was very much, we got a lot of guidance early. And I think in my second year, there was more freedom to explore your interest. I took at the time a community-based participatory research course and delved more into qualitative research. And so I kind of had that opportunity to look at and learn more about some of the methods that I would be interested in using in the future. So I think that's the beauty of it all, is that I think that while it is 2 years, the one thing that I really appreciated was that like you're around like-minded people who kind of are very frustrated with the way things are, and they want to change the way things are. And so I kind of saw it as like it was a refreshing change after doing residency and working hard, seeing patients, and putting bandages, treating them, sending them out. I at that point was very frustrated, and so I saw that as a refreshing change from the experience I had previously, where less so about the program, but just more so about the system that we practice in. And so I found that as a great break from that environment of just working under the realm of the system and looking, how can we improve access to care? How can we improve how we deliver care, the cost of care, all those sorts of things. And I'm obviously biased because I'm into health services research, but these were all issues that I knew that I was interested in. I didn't quite have the language then to kind of articulate that, but that was the part I really appreciated about. So while it's 2 years, like it flew by. It really flew by. It feels like so long ago, where I was, at Penn, working with some of these guys. I mean, these guys were residents then, and now. And so the other thing I'll say is like it makes me feel old now. So, but that is the cool part about the whole process, is that. And much of research is like, I feel it's a commitment to the process, and not necessarily so much of us all are like so much outcome based throughout our entire, training, like what grades that you get, what however you're measured, whereas like research is so much about the trial and error of it all. And that's really what's going to build sustainability and longevity in your career. And all of those things, I think, are really kind of the antidote to burnout in this environment that we're thinking about like that more to really push our careers.
Would you guys be able to talk for a minute, just like about what was in your thought process about whether or not you kind of felt like you needed to get a master's degree along with the fellowship, or if that was like something that you felt was essential to it, or something that was unessential?
I think at Penn, it kind of came with the program is that we ended up getting a master's in health policy research. So I kind of saw it as like, if you're going to spend 2 years, like, why not get a master's at the end of all of that? I'm going to be doing all the same work, but I'm not sure if I know at Yale for the K-12, you have the opportunity to get a master's in health science research. So you have that opportunity. When I started off at the K-12, since I had already gotten the master's, I did not take the steps to get that because I already had that at that point. So
I think what I would say about the masters is that like the other thing that became a lot more visible to me like going down this path towards a research career is like how when you run a clinical research lab, for lack of a better word, the skills that you require are sort of multidimensional, and you have a team, right? You have analysts, you have research coordinators, project managers, statisticians, qualitative experts, and then you, who's sort of the clinical expert and the grant writer, and you're doing some of the lifting and whatnot. And I think the master's program, because it attracts people from lots of different areas of life, and a lot of people who are going on to pursue PhDs will take some of the introductory classwork to you. It gives you a little bit of a language to talk to people that you are going to be collaborating with in the future very nicely, and like it helps like set you up that you know what you're talking about. You have some background, you're asking the smart questions, they're not having to teach you. And so I think for me, the master's like really helped equip me with certain skills and certain vocabulary so that I could talk and engage with my team in a way that was more productive and effective, and just helps the process move along a lot more smoothly now that I'm more active in like a research career.
For me, I feel like I've sort of mentioned this. The master's was a key part of what I was looking for. I really wanted to have the skills to like really understand what the entire team was doing, but also to make sure that when I was doing the basics, like designing things, that I was doing that bit right. Because one of the things that really brought me to research was a love of like evidence-based medicine and a realization that sometimes that evidence could be better, is going to be the way that we phrase that. So just, I really wanted to, if I was going to be contributing to the body of knowledge, to be doing that the correct way with reproducible, reasonable results and reasonably asked questions. So I was really looking for sort of the appropriate didactics and the appropriate training to get that.
I'll just add that I think all of us are in similar paths where we had minimal to no research experience kind of prior to our fellowship and master's training. That's not true for everyone. Obviously, there are people who have MPHs or people with PhDs. There are people who like intro to what is p-value lecture would have been like highly offensive at their level of fellowship. And so there are programs that don't require masters. And I think it just depends on how comfortable you are with the skills that you have kind of going into it.
Yeah, I have to say having that flexibility in a program is also kind of great, where I ended up in a similar situation to Shasha, where I came into my research fellowship already with master's degree. And well, initially was intended to also get a master's of health sciences in clinical research, I realized that I had done almost all the required courses already, and I really did not want to take intro to biostats for the fourth time in my life. But being able to work out well, I still had some funding for classes, and being able to there's still skills to learn and things to learn. And so being able to find classes that you can take, even if it doesn't lead to a formal degree, I found to be super helpful. And also just the people you meet along the way.
I think there was a question from some of our audience about whether or not you feel most fellowships are kind of all the same, or that there are specific things that set programs apart. And I think that kind of ties into what Rafi was saying here of like, there are some flexibility but others, it sounds like, at least for you guys, there was a lot of consistency. So I wonder if you guys would address that.
One thing I will say that like really to me, I've always felt kind of dictates like fellowship and really your career thereafter is really the people that you're working with. I think that's what really determines it all. And that's kind of how I've always made all my big decisions when I transition from one place to another, or like who are the people I'm going to be working with, who could be my mentors, who will invest time into me, and if they have shared interest in some of the same issues you're really passionate about, I think that's even better. But I think the bottom line is like who will invest in you, and who can you build a meaningful relationship with and learn from, and we'll put time into investing into you and your relationship with them and develop you as a clinician scientist. I think that to me is what dictates where the best fit will be, less so like the courses, the structure, all those kinds of things themselves. Because as you've probably already seen, there's not much difference. I mean, there's at Yale, there's a master's in health sciences, I think, and then at Penn, we had a master's in health policy research. There are nuances there, but once you take an intro to biostats course, that's pretty much going to be the same just about everywhere you go. And qualitative research, same goes for many other courses. But for me, it was overall about the relationships and mentors. I think mentoring that could be a whole webinar in and of itself, is mentorship. And your colleagues, your peers, and peer-to-peer relationships and mentorships. I think that's what really dictates, to me, choice and fit for programs.
Yeah, Eddie, I'm really glad you brought that up, because I think that, while we say, for some people look at it of like, it's a 2-year investment, that's half the time I spent training in residency. 2 years does fly by. And if you're feeling like you don't want to have to move again after 2 years, or you have a family and you're trying to set roots down, or you're trying to move back closer to home, or an area where you feel like is going to be the right place for you, making sure that you have identified mentorship and people who will invest in you beyond that 2 years of your fellowship spot is unbelievably important. In toxicology, there's, I think, maybe 5 NIH funded toxicology board certified researchers. And so my pool of people who would be potential mentors was very small, but luckily aligned with us wanting to move back to New York and be closer to my family. I have 2 young children. And so it all kind of really came together unbelievably beautifully, that I had a mentor who was a tox person, and who was at the institution that was, had a fellowship opportunity. And so really looking to a place where if you think you have an identified topic area, or at least a problem that you're hoping to solve, knowing that there's mentorship there that you can build momentum with, like for 2 years and potentially beyond, is really a great thing.
I think we talked a fair amount about what people should kind of look for in a program, but did you get a sense from when you were applying what programs you were looking for in applicants? We kind of touched on this a bit of like, some people came in with some background research. Some people maybe touched a pipette once, but didn't do anything in like health services. But did you have a sense of like what they were looking for from you?
Commitment is the biggest thing. People will be investing time in you, resources in you. And so they want to know that, like, one of the questions I got asked most commonly early on in the interview processes were like, are you looking to be a clinician researcher? Are you looking to like split your time or spend most of your time researching? How far are you going to go with this? Or is this just a way to spend like a year or 2 in a cool city after you graduate? So that's just like, do I mean it when I say I want to be a researcher?
One thing I will add too is that investment, it goes 2 ways too, though, because when you're pursuing a fellowship, because I remember when I was finishing residency a lot, I think I was the only one of my like close friends from residency who did a fellowship, and you're kind of foregoing larger, more lucrative offers. I know that a lot of my friends took, large contracts afterward. And so I think the bottom line is showcasing that you're committed to this career. And I mean, it's not to be understated that, that's 2 years of the opportunity cost of taking a pay cut over the course of a fellowship. And so, it's not something that, I mean, you can do it and, see a cool city, which I've heard people say, but like the idea is that you're investing in a career of this. And so however you can demonstrate that, hey, I'm passionate, and I think it goes back to the things I was saying originally, is like anybody can do research. Like as long as you're passionate enough about something and you're resilient. And I think the passion and commitment are things that you can easily demonstrate by the project you've been involved in. I mean, there are a lot of people that come into fellowships with a lot of experience with research, but I don't think you necessarily have to have that. I think you just have to show a commitment or passion to any sort of, or solving a problem or posing questions to a problem or issue and figuring out how you can address it. And it almost comes off like a story. Like people want to see a story to, how you got to this point. If as long as they can see a story, then I think that how you articulate that story is important. But however you can do that, I think is most important. And that's the cool part about it, is that unlike all the other things we've done previously, where you're like, again, very outcome based, a lot of it is about you as a person and like what drives you, what gets you up, what keeps you committed in this career, and what when days are hard, what are some of the issues that you think about, so we're like, hey, I can still get up and go to work and do this because I'm still excited about this while I had a tough day, previously. The easier you can articulate that, the overall better applicant I think you come off as. So, and I will say, when I say committed, it's hard to know what you want to do early in your career, exactly what you want to do. But that being said, a lot of people will have, and I see this even now, people a little bit more senior, like have a lot of interest in different areas. I think as much as you can to kind of like funnel your interests down to like maybe a handful of areas you're really interested in, that's important too. Because anybody can have, I want to do a little bit of this, I want to do a little bit of that. And you kind of can come off, if it's in too many areas, you can come off as scattered. So you just want to be mindful of that as well.
Yeah, I'll just add, I completely agree that kind of the commitment to this like long grind that is a research career and a passion about something. And the beauty of emergency medicine is that it could be it could be a million different things. It could be tangentially related to the delivery of emergency medicine, but that, we are also kind of big picture thinkers. And, it could be anything from like a molecule and tox research to like Medicaid expansion and everything that's in between. So definitely like the commitment to the process and like the passion for understanding and thereby fixing a problem. But, this is academics. We are like people who chase and collect gold stickers, and that's no different for research fellowship. That's not to say you need like multiple, first author publications or poster presentations to apply. That you should definitely, if you're committed and you haven't gotten to do a lot of research during your residency, still there are lots of opportunities for you still. But as much as you can, everyone understands that your primary job in residency is to learn clinical medicine and to be a good emergency medicine doctor. If you happen to be at a place that has, a research division with faculty working on research projects, if you are, lucky enough to get connected to the network through SAEM or other professional organizations, as much as you can, be a part of some research project and talk about that with some like knowledge and passion during interviews, that is always helpful too.
Agreed.
We're sort of in our last 10 minutes right now. So my big question for all of y'all is, what's something you wish you knew when you kind of started off on this adventure, or like wish that someone told you when you first were kind of applying or thinking about applying, now that you know what you know? And also a shout out to the ARMED program, which is, for those who don't know, it is through SAEM and is a longitudinal research course, I believe, that I can't remember, is it funded or not? There's some scholarships for it though, I think. Yeah.
I know I've touched upon this, but I really want to reiterate how big resilience is throughout all of this. Is that you always hear, like, I think early, it's like when you see the iceberg, you always hear about people's success stories. Oh, they got this grade, they got this paper, they got this position, they got this title. You always hear about the success stories. But what's underneath that is a big part of failure. And I think everybody fails. I think what comes down to it, and this is kind of what I would tell my younger self, is that it's not so much the failures, how you react to it, how you learn from it, and see it as an opportunity to repivot, grow, learn something new, because we all will deal with failure, whether it's visible to everyone or not. Like, everyone will deal with it in some capacity. So that's one big thing I would say, that I would say to anyone that is interested or considering career research, is it almost takes, to some degree, I was talking to somebody about this the other day, and it's almost like borderline, to some degree, like a sociopath, because you get failure, and you really have to constantly be able to push against failure constantly, like along the way, and still be committed to it and still want to do it. It's like a toxic relationship, really. That's that's what it can be like. But if you're passionate enough, like, and you can push through that, it will pay dividends in the long term. I guarantee you that it would definitely pay dividends.
I think I would say I wish I had known kind of how many ways people can mentor you. And, like, there's this idea that there's like this one person who is going to both like give you methods, mentorship, and content expertise and career development knowledge and grantsmanship, that all of these like skills that you need to learn is going to come from one person. And if you don't find that person at wherever you're applying, you shouldn't go there for fellowship, is a myth. I have multiple mentors play like different roles. People are incredibly generous with their time, mentoring kind of the next generation is part of, a career highlight for many in research and in academics kind of more broadly. But when thinking about like, who are you going to learn from, I would say, like, don't think that they all have to be in the department where you do your fellowship. Like, look outside at other departments, non-clinician. A lot of really great mentors on K Award mentorship teams are PhDs that don't have an MD degree. In this world of, Zooming, some of my mentors that I meet with regularly, one of them I've never even met in person. It's like the kind of possibilities in terms of who can mentor you and who wants to mentor you are really, it can be as big as you can kind of make for yourself.
Maybe it's not something that I wish I knew, but I've like come to learn a lot over the last year and starting to interact with SAEM more, is that the community of SAEM researchers is pretty small and they don't want you to fail. If you want to do research, SAEM and emergency medicine researchers want you to succeed, because on the scale of disciplines and like NIH funding, we are so small. And they really, really want to bring up and lift up junior faculty who are committed to research and to using research to solve problems, because that's the way that we advance our field forward and solve like the large systemic problems that exist within our practice. And so if you are, maybe at your individual institution, you might not find as much support, but if you really turn to the community of SAEM research that is out there, I truly believe that there are people that will lift you up. I have seen it happen to people who have been lifted up and back onto the platform and said, okay, let's right your wheels on your cart and get you going again. And I really think that exists within our specialty.
One thing I want to add to that too is the importance of like building relationships. Those are all great points you guys both made, but I think it's like anything else. You meet someone, you meet a mentor, you have to kind of put yourself out there and network with people. But you meet someone, you start working with them, you realize they're, a great fit. This person, like, you guys see the world similarly, et cetera. You have the same work ethic, great. But you might, make a relationship with someone, you realize that you may not work well together. Your personalities might not mesh. And so I think ultimately, like, the importance of investing in those relationships is like I think it's huge. And I think it's common sense, but you'd be surprised the number of people that don't realize that.
Awesome. Uh, is there anything that you guys have been dying to add or anything that anyone's been dying to ask? I
I
guess,
just,
Mike? Oh, sorry.
go ahead. I just want to say that's a really good conversation. It's
Yeah.
interesting to hear from so many different perspectives, and I'm curious. I love that you each have done something similar and different, but I am curious to see what you guys would recommend for reaching out to people or any tips of cold calling versus not for researchers, I guess, looking to move forward.
I think the best, some of the most fulfilling relationships I've made have been essentially serendipitous. My mentor and a close collaborator and a good friend to this day I met, Dr. Federico Vaca, was when he came to give a lecture at Penn, and it was very serendipitous. And so from that, we met and exchanged emails, and to this day we collaborate. We're good friends. We talk regularly. And so I think a lot of it is just putting yourself out there and reaching out to people. And if it means cold calling, emailing someone, I say go for it. The worst that happens is they don't respond. And if they don't respond, I wouldn't let that discourage you, because email can be a whole thing in and of itself. But sometimes it might take a second email. But yeah, by all means, email, cold call away, I think.
Absolutely. I was going to underscore what Edouard had been saying kind of this entire time about being comfortable with failure. I had to email plenty of people who are like now my absolute mentors multiple times in the beginning. Keep in mind that somebody who is like involved in research, their inbox probably looks like a nightmare on a good day. So think of it less as they are ignoring me and more like it might take a couple of tries for them to get this email when they are in a headspace to be able to interact with it. Obviously don't do the like email a day thing, but after a reasonable wait period, I don't think there's anything wrong with like reaching back out.
Yeah, and I have been both a sender and receiver of many cold emails, and they have led to like really meaningful mentorships and relationships. I think in terms of like practical advice, when you do cold email, like tell them what you want to talk about in the email. You know, if the email is just like, I was just hoping we could chat, period, it's a different kind of mental commitment on part of that other person than if you say, I saw you did this fellowship. I'm interested in hearing more. I saw you wrote this paper. I was interested in hearing about this. Whatever your question for them is, like if you can be specific, and then once you kind of have their time, you can ask kind of all of these bigger, broader, more general questions. But I'm always more like willing to have a conversation when I know like what people want to talk about, when as opposed to like just very, very broad and nebulous.
I would also say lean into your alumni, your residency alumni networks and or your faculty networks. So like if you know you're really interested in social determinants of health and you're trying to get in touch with Dr. Richardson, but she hasn't responded to your email, but there's somebody who does social determinants of health research or, went to Sinai temporarily and knows her, right? Like use those people above you who can help facilitate those conversations. Like if I get a text from somebody who is a mentor or a mentee of mine saying, hey, I have this great person who'd love to talk to you about your work, I'm so much like quicker to respond than like sifting through the inbox trying to find those emails that I've like temporarily cognitively put on hold. So things like your alumni network and your faculty networks where you are there to support you. Like lean on other people who might be able to help, make those connections for you and expedite that process a little bit.
One quick cheat code I've learned over time with emails: whenever you're cold calling or emailing anyone that's incredibly busy or seniored, it's always helpful to put your ask in the title. Like whatever you want to say in the title. If you make it vague, people are less likely to respond.
I think one question I have is, what's a good reasonable ask? I think sometimes people kind of struggle with that as well, of, not wanting to say like, please guide me in my future career, but also not wanting to say like, hey, can we just talk for a cup of coffee? And what's like a good way to sort of frame that?
I actually agree with what I think Ucha touched upon this is that making it as specific as possible. Like if you have a really directed question and exactly you've thought it says the message that you thought about, what you want from them. Everybody's time is like of the essence for everyone. But if you have a very directed question, I think that's the most helpful. I know oftentimes because I've been on that end where you're like, you find someone, you're like, this person seems great. I just want help and guidance on my life and my career. That's really what I want. And you might not be able to get a lot if you email and say, hey, can we talk about life and, career and stuff. So starting off by, again, in the title, a specific question that you might be thinking of, that you might genuinely want the answer to, and that can lead to, more of an organic relationship and discussion after. So
Thanks. I think it's now 4:02. Does anyone have any sort of parting words or anything? Well,
it
I
will
guess
pay.
I'll.
I encourage everyone like this career will absolutely pay dividends in the long term. Like if you're on the fence about it, if you're passionate about something, I say go for it. We need more researchers, and we also need more researchers who haven't had a lot of exposure to research. I think we need more of that because I've come across so many people who have had research opportunities since, very early, since high school, and knew this is what they wanted to do, which is awesome, terrific. But also the people who haven't had exposure to research since the beginning, there's a way in which you see the world and the way in which you think about the world that like it's will be appreciated. So if you're on the fence about it, do it.
I agree. We need you. We as in emergency medicine needs you. Your patients need you, and I think just society needs kind of the unique lens that emergency doctors can bring to advancing science and research.
Awesome. Well, thank you, everyone, and thanks for coming and all your wonderful insights and perspectives. I'm guessing were your emails attached to the description for this thing? Would it be all right if some of the folks out here emailed you guys up with a specific ask to follow up about the things that you guys discussed today?
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
I'll throw mine in the
Absolutely. Yeah, I'll put mine in the chat as well.
Yeah, because now you guys actually have something that you can specifically put in the subject heading of the email.
Yeah.
RLS. This week.
Yes.
Question about thing you said during RLS.
Yeah, absolutely.
So remember.
Absolutely. Use it.
Well, I gotta get going. Thank you all for your time.
Thank you all.
Thanks, everyone.